guys who are down in Venezuela, the people that went down there to try to free the people in Venezuela. So everything across the board. So it's not revenge. It's really setting things right. The American people kind of demanded this. They voted for it, and they're getting it.
What I find incredible is the lack of opposition in the last 2 weeks. What happened to the resistance?
I think you see, I want to make it the analogy kind of the Tory party to the Reform Party. In the established order, they get so lazy because they control the levers of power. They control the financial community, or the financial community. So it's the financial community, the tech community, the corporatists, the universities, pop culture, high culture, media, and they get lazy. I am not shocked. I am surprised at how quickly the ideas are evaporating. What I mean by that, when you say no resistance, let's break it down in pieces. Number one, in the confirmation hearings, and we just had Tulsi and Bobby Kennedy approved, which they said was never going to happen. After we got Pete Hegseth approved, they said it was never going to happen. If you go back and your audience looks at the confirmation hearings, Marco Rubio is laying out the end of the post-war international rules-based order. Pete Hegseth is talking about a revolution in military affairs. Russ Vought and really Scott Bessent are talking about a new economic model for the United States based on external revenue. Look at this thing, what we call the golden door, the golden market. Huge ideas put out on this Trump revolution, what he calls a revolution of common sense. There's no pushback. There's people going after the personal shortcomings or foibles of these individuals, but there's no pushback, virtually no pushback on the ideas, and ideas have consequences. Then if you look at the resistance in the streets, a lot of this, remember, it's how it's financed. This is why USAID is so important. So we're choking down and cutting off the oxygen because this hasn't really been financed by a lot of private groups. That money's all been slush fund through the government. So when you talk about resistance at every level, they've been shattered. They've been shattered from their financing sources. The media's kind of is just almost like a puppy now because their audience has collapsed. And one of the reasons the audience collapsed, they lied to them the entire time about how they were going to win. So at every level where there would be resistance, there's just been an absolute collapse. On top of that, the Democrats, because as I've been saying for a long time, they're ruled kind of from this octogenarian group. Those people refuse to turn over power. The committee heads, they had a protest yesterday, and the committee heads of the Democrats are all, white guys in their 70s and their 80s that don't even, can't communicate with a young audience. So no, it's been shattered. It will come back as it thinks through, but the resistance to Trump 2.0 has been less than the resistance of the Tories to Nigel Reform's Reform Party, and that's kind of hard to believe since it looks like there's been almost no resistance to that. So you are where you are, and I think my theory of the case of flood the zone and give them all pedal, no brake. It's just attack, keep driving it, flood the zone, overwhelm them. It gets to be a psychological thing. They don't even know what to choose and picking. You see it by the coverage. They're overwhelmed. They don't know where to turn. They don't have the normal levers of power they could grab. And so they're kind of adrift.
Who do you think should be on the top target list of the Trump DOJ?
Well, first, I think we have to go back. I'm a huge advocate that radical transparency and declassification is our best friend. I think just in the Trump era, we have to go back to the beginning. And I'm a very strong advocate that DOJ can handle this because they got so much going on. To really make sure that we never go to another period of weaponization, I think a special prosecutor overall has to do it. And the special prosecutor then goes back to even before Trump was president. You go back to Crossfire Hurricane. You go back to Cambridge. You go back to MI6 involvement. You go back to the Five Eyes involvement in all this. You're going to have to go in some places that people don't want to go, but it has to happen. We have to find out about the intelligence community overall. You have to go back to the Russia hoax, all of that. You have to go back to then the stolen election. You have to go back to J6 to get to the bottom of that. And then the vast criminal conspiracy against President Trump to indict him 92 times on charges that just on the Jack Smith stuff alone would be 300 years in a federal prison because they wanted him to die in federal prison. The reason they were so over the top, your audience should miss the point, they never thought we would be back. They thought we were finished. We put Bannon in prison, Navarro in prison, we imprison Trump, they're finished. It was the exact opposite, and that's one of the reasons that they're so shocked and so not organized in the resistance. They just got lazy, right? It didn't work the big muscles, didn't do the reps you need, like in sports, to be on top of things. In addition to all that happening, I think further investigations have to go on the pandemic. Further investigations have to go of how we had this, of the invasion of our country, very organized, who paid for it, who did it. So to me, there's a massive series of investigations we have to have so the American people can fully understand how the apparatus came about, how it's weaponized, and then how is it used against the American people, and everything like the pandemic to things like the invasion of our country. So I think these are massive investigations. If I felt confident that Congress could do it in an organized way with public hearings, I would be the first to advocate that, and maybe it's dual track. But I believe you have to have a grand jury, you have to have high levels of evidence, and all this has to be made public. But I think this goes on for years, and to me, it's one of the most important things we could do. It has to happen, or we're not going to have a country. Just us winning and changing fundamentally things, the administration say will not. You have to go. The cancer is in the body. It's metastasizing. Now we're here stopping it on the administrative state, on the deep state, but you got to go back to the source of the disease and really not just cut it out, but actually understand and study it of how it happened and who's responsible. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that go to prison. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to go to prison for many, many years.
Just before Biden left office, he issued a series of pardons to his allies, preemptive pardons and so on. Do you think that those should still apply? Is there any way of getting around those pardons?
It's a quite fascinating topic. I believe Biden waited too long because he's trying to be cute and didn't want to too wit. People were walking into the Capitol for the inauguration, and at noon is when you traditionally take the oath around noon. So officially the term ends at noon on the 20th. People were walking in at close to 11 o'clock, and they're announcing pardons. This is how ashamed they were of the pardons for the family, etc. I find it ironic, since I went to a federal prison, and I didn't go to a camp. I went to a prison. I went to a cell block and a cell in a 800-man prison that has 1,200 prisoners because of overcrowding. The people that put me there are who thought I would never return and never come back. Nancy Pelosi's kind of been kicked to the curb because all the older Democrats are looked at as feckless. But the J6 committee went begging for pardons. This is unheard of. They approached the White House and put huge pressure on Biden to give them preemptive blanket pardons, which we don't even know is legal. It's never happened in the United States except one technical time on Nixon. And Nixon really had a House Judiciary Committee that was about to issue criminal indictments on him. So it wasn't like he didn't, they had a process that went on for over a year. Nixon knew specifically what he was going to be charged with when this happened, or relevant. So it wasn't a blanket preemptive pardon. It was kind of done to make sure he had a deal. They guaranteed it to him so he'd get out of the White House and they could go on with their life. This is totally different. The people that put me in prison for a misdemeanor for 4 months, which also people understand, in a federal prison, the prison I was in is over 100 years old, has never had a misdemeanor. One of the wardens and one of the guys there told me one time they couldn't find a misdemeanor in the federal system. Our prisons are so overcrowded, they don't even have room for the felons. So those people, Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson, the people that went after Trump and gave criminal referrals on Trump, that Jack Smith then lined up for 300 years in prison, crimes for 300 years in prison on Trump, and sent Peter Navarro to prison, and sent 1,000 J6 people to prison. These people then went begging for a pardon for what they had done. I'm going, whoa, what they done can't stand up underneath scrutiny. So number one, I think technically, and I've been a big advocate of this, that the Justice Department should not effectuate any of those, or we've got to go another route, because we are going to hold these people accountable. This is going to be a massive part of the investigation of the vast criminal conspiracy, not just against President Trump and not just the people but what actually went on. I have no time and no burning place in my heart for revenge. What I have is that this can never happen again. Fortunately, I happen to be a tough enough Mick that could get through at 70 years old, 4 months in prison, which is not easy. These prisons are quite dangerous because of the drugs, okay, and the violence that comes from the drugs. It's really for the J6 people and others, and people that don't have my financial resources or kind of, you know, cussedness, that they have to be protected. We can never allow this to happen again. I know so many people are saying that if they went to prison, they'd be shattered from what they had to have. The J6 people were so arrogant, so cocky in Justice Department because they never thought Trump's people were coming back, and now they're petrified. And I hear that Jack Smith's team is quite upset that they didn't get pardons. I will just tell them, lawyer up. You might want to check countries that don't have treaties with the United States, right? You might want to look at, living the rest of your life there, because investigations are going to happen. We cannot, and President Trump has no time for this. He's doing his thing, but there are people around him, and you can already see with the people going to the Justice Department. Emil Bovee, who's just been a superstar over the last 3 years, he's the #3 guy. The people around President Trump that Boris Epstein put in there are extraordinary. So folks in England should understand, we're going to have things like this going to happen every day, but there's going to be a massive investigation side that's not driven by Trump, but driven by other people, so we can make sure that this never happens again in our republic.
Are you satisfied that you're not going to go to prison again? Because I know there was a case in New York against you. Obviously, you're not protected.
No, I don't think I will go to. It's a totally trumped up charge. When they built the wall, it went from saying, "Oh, he stole $22 million and they did it from all people in Manhattan." They just in a court filing or in court a month ago, they said it's about $50,000 that I gave to the veteran that had no legs on money that they were paying me to do all the organizational effort I did around the wall. So now I'm very confident that I won't go to jail again. But you know what? It's an Alvin Bragg. We now know that U.S. aid money went to back Soros to back this. These are all rigged. It's the same situation that gave President Trump, found him guilty of 34 felonies, so he can't get a fair trial. You know that. And they would put President Trump in. If he had not won on November 5th, your audience should understand, President Trump would have been in, they would have tried to put him in prison for a decade just in New York City. So this is dangerous. It's so rigged, and we're seeing people now start to reject it. But no, I feel highly confident that won't happen. But I tell people, don't think this is, unless we take this out root and branch now. This could always come up in the future. And I tell people when they first come in, they want to be in leadership roles. I said, listen, you've got to do a deep you got to do a deep check here, because we're going up against the established order that controls the most powerful nation in the history of the earth. They will send you to prison, or in Trump's case, and I've warned about this, assassination. So I said, if you're not prepared to go to prison, if you're not prepared to sacrifice your life, you're in the wrong line of work. This is all-out political warfare between two sides of the United States that can't stand each other. Each side they think we're barbarians. We think they've destroyed the country. We think they're dangerous. They think that we're beyond dangerous. There's no love lost here between others. And look what they did to President Trump. And now that we're in charge, we owe it to this country. And here's what I tell people. Just get the facts out. What helps us, every time there's more facts that come out, because now, look what's happening. Ratcliffe gets to the CIA, and in 2 days, first day, well, guess what? The CIA actually did agree. He released, the CIA did agree that the virus came from the Wuhan lab. What did War Room say on, I don't remember, January 20th of 2020? We came out with that first, and we were taken off all platforms. We were deplatformed because this is conspiracy theory. Now we know the CIA had information. The next day, Ratcliffe leaked out that, hey, the Chinese Communist Party, since the PLA controlled the lab, maybe either inadvertently leaked on their watch, or they might have even released it on purpose. So my point is, I want to declassify 5 million documents right now. I want to have radical transparency in all of these court hearings, including, we're a huge believer that General Milley must be recalled to active duty. He must go before a military tribunal under the laws of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is different than civilian law here. General Milley has to be tried for treason, because I believe he's guilty of treason, but that has to be done in a fair and equitable way. But I think that has to be done now. And so you're going to see people around President Trump and people in the MAGA movement that have these platforms that are quite powerful. really putting pressure on that we got to drive this one and continue to do it. And people should understand, I'm a huge advocate of releasing documentation of what MI6 and the CIA have been doing for years. The British people are not paying, didn't know they were paying for this. The American people didn't know they were paying for this. This is not acceptable. It's very much like when the Church Commission came up in the 70s, because the CIA, we had no House Intelligence Committee, we had no Senate Intelligence Committee, the CIA had been out of control. We found out in that all the involvement they had in assassinations in sub-Saharan, in Africa and in Latin America, and they didn't even want to touch their involvement in assassinations here in the United States of either Martin Luther King or Bobby Kennedy or Jack Kennedy and or others, right, their involvement. And so I believe in massive declassification and massive radical transparency.
Now let me put the Democrats' view of the first 2 weeks to you, and I want you to react. So this was in the New York Times. Senator Tim Kaine, describing Trump's first 2 weeks, said it reminded him of his time when he lived in Honduras during a military dictatorship in the 1980s. He said it's like watching Putin or Berlusconi. It's a bit of an odd comparison to the Italian Prime Minister. They also say that, Elon Musk has far too much power. He's a billionaire who has lots of government contracts, has conflicts of interest. They also say that President Trump is abusing his executive power and he should be going through Congress for doing all sorts of things that he's doing using executive orders and so on. So are we seeing Trump as the dictator? Is this an abuse of power?
Ideas have consequences. The ideas of our revolutionary generation and our framers had big consequences for your audience. Remember, we were one of the founding elements with India of what was going to be a superpower empire, and our revolutionary generation specifically opted out because they saw what a landed aristocracy or what an oligarchy could contaminate commons, right? What they felt commons was crooked, and also give monopolistic power to, like, the British East India Company. And our revolutionary generation, who, remember, would have financially benefited because they were lawyers and real estate speculators and merchants. Some might call them freebooters.
Tax dodgers.
Well, because they had a definition of, they had difference of opinion of external revenues versus their money. But those ideas had massive consequences that eventually led to a break, in a military break, that we had to win our freedom on a battlefield after 8 years. Here you're seeing, and I want to make sure your audience understands this. There is, President Trump was in these years of what I call the lion in winter. And what the Republican establishment would make sure, they would go to Mar-a-Lago to make sure the lion was in the cage. We were sitting there going, hey, we're working every day on the political side at the grassroots level, and also helping guide these institutions that are doing the hard work of policy and building teams and networks to make sure that when he returns, because he's thought this through a lot, that we have muzzle velocity to drive this through and accomplish what we want to accomplish that we resorted to in the first time. One of these is a big idea. It's called the unitary theory of the executive. Now, before Dick Cheney got into things with Congress and what President Trump thinks is quite different. And this is where you see Russ Vought and Mike Davis and Mark Paoletta and others that are some of the lawyers and the constitutional lawyers involved in this. The unitary theory says by our Constitution, the president has three roles as defined. Number one, he's the chief executive officer of the U.S. government. Number two, he's the commander-in-chief of the uniformed services, the military. And the third, which I never want to talk about, he's the chief magistrate and chief law enforcement officer of the government. Now, since Watergate, and Watergate was really a legal coup against Nixon. Not so much CIA was involved, other people were involved, the Woodward Bernstein, the media, but it was really Judge Sirica, a federal judge, working with lawyers on the House Impeachment Committee, also working with lawyers in the DOJ that we now know did much of what they've been trying to do with President Trump. And so they hate the fact that the Justice Department, the FBI, has been hermetically sealed, and these progressive left globalists have run it at detriment to any Republican administration. And although most Republican administrations didn't go hard at all, they would be batted back immediately. And even President Trump, we were thwarted in year one. So in the unified theory, as chief executive, he's sitting there saying, hey, they give me pretty open field running in the Constitution about my Article 2 powers, to wit, and what Keynes talking about a lot is about the money that gets allocated or appropriated is a law. But for instance, if there's $300 billion in a green, he calls it a green new scam, that's still there, and a law has been passed, and he thinks that they can show that it hasn't been used properly or it's unspent. He believes that the Constitution says the appropriation is a ceiling, and he has the ability to go back and redirect it. He also thinks he has the ability, with Elon Musk as an outside advisor, when they highlight something like USAID and say this is really a CIA cutout. It's the money's supposed to be for development, helping people, philanthropy. We actually know it's a CIA cutout, and it's been funding, as we showed on War Room, it's been funding the invasion through the NGOs, the invasion on the southern border. Oh, by the way, it's also been funding all types of media suppression and online suppression to suppress the MAGA movement and President Trump's followers in the United States, including deplatforming people like my show. Then he feels that he can say, hey, I'm going to zero this out, and Congress has got to catch up with me. On the military side, he feels, hey, I can send Pete Hegseth to the border, my Secretary of Defense, to the border with 1,500 troops to protect the national security, right? And I can do that, and I will do it. He also says, hey, I can recall Milley back to uniform and have him put on trial for treason. On the other side, he's saying, hey, the FBI, I can redo the FBI, I can restructure the Justice Department, and you're not going to stop me, right? Because I am the chief executive, I'm president of the United States. This is why Kane and these elite globalists are in shock. I mean, your first question about they're not ready, this is kind of their bleeding right now. They're writing op-eds in the Wall Street Journal, they're writing op-eds in the New York Times. I got a news flash for them. Op-eds in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal are not going to hack it. If that's what you're going to bring, you're bringing a knife to a gunfight, okay? Because this is a confrontation. This is what I'm saying, Days of Thunder. President Trump is, over this whole vertical, is hitting them every day with 10, 15, 20 executive actions and executive orders. I feel we have the best handle on it. And I tell guys, there's a dozen things we can't even cover today because we got to focus on the 3 or 4 most major ones. So this is a direct confrontation. Heads up to folks in England. If you are to ever take your country back, your first step was Brexit. But if you're ever to take your country back because you saw what the established order, because I sat with Theresa May's and this crowd when they came over, they saw Brexit as a problem and they didn't want to deal with it. You then saw Boris Johnson, that his idea was to have it as Singapore and the Thames, right, was to basically do a deal with like the oligarchs in the city of London and the tech oligarchs in Cambridge and have the same problem on a smaller scale of the United States. When the Reform Party and others come together, when you go after to actually try to take the apparatus apart and try to have it respond to the British people, you're going to have, it's going to be a smaller scale, but it'll be just as intense. Your day's coming. Either that, you'll never get your freedom back. And you're seeing right here, it's going to get ugly. And I can understand why Kane and those guys think it is an authoritarian thing. My point is, you're taking us to court. You're using the court system. You can't pass legislation because you're not in the majority thing, but you can still get up there and use the bully pulpit. You still have all the media, although they've been kind of shattered by new media and the podcast, right, and the things like the GB Newses of the world. You've been shattered by that, but you still have all those tools. If you have an argument that people believe, and this is my point to our side, radical transparency. The more information you put out, the American people, I didn't know that. I'm paying for that. This is why we're $2 trillion. Radical transparency. Radical declassification of these documents never should be classified because it's classified to make sure the globalists and the elitists can do it. So Tim Kaine's going to have many more bad days in front of him. They've already suing us everywhere from the deportations to every step President Trump does. They're trying to stop it. We're powering through it. And here's what's so great is President Trump is so kowtow, the Republican establishment's kowtowing to them, and so that now you're seeing him as a man in full. He is full on, and everything's a jackhammer, and there's no resistance on our side, which there traditionally was. To wit, some of the guys on the internet have been saying, "Hey, House Freedom Caucus." The feckless nature of the limited government conservatives, House Freedom Caucus, they went after USAID for 10 years and never got anything. I said, guys, Eli Crane, Matt Gaetz, these guys would say in the middle of the night in these heated debates with the appropriations committees, and we would do it. We would cover it live, and we'd have thousands of people watching it. They put the case for it that we're putting today, that Elon Musk is using to say this has to be shut down. And the Republicans, it wouldn't even get to the vote of the Democrats. The Republican establishment, by 2/3, 1/3, would say, no, we're going to do it. The controlled opposition, just like the Tories, would go along to get along. That is changing. President Trump has them so shocked that right now they're totally quiet and letting President Trump do what he has to do.
There's a famous clip of you describing conservatives in a very rude way, using very rude words.
It's not rude. It
begins with P, but we won't.
No, it's pusillanimous. Listen, for your audience, you guys know this in England. Your country didn't get all screwed up because the conservatives were in power for 12 years. Good God, you had the Tories. Look what happened. Look on immigration. Look at all the money you put in Ukraine. Everything that could have been done, particularly after Brexit, to basically make Britain great again, to make the United Kingdom great, to reinvest money, to make sure that right now, because financially, economically, outside of kind of the city of London and Greater London, because it is a little bit of Thames on the Thames, Singapore and the Thames, the rest of the hinterland's kind of a third world country. You look at economics, it's not right. You could have redone that. You had conservative government, and this is why I say, it's not Republicans or Democrats. It's not Tories or Labor. It's not conservatives or liberals or progressives. Those are all old, that misdirected. It is populist nationalists that believe in the citizens of the country and the country itself. And what they must focus on is what's best for the country and what's best for the citizens of the country. Or you have these elite globalists. And they're saying you have nothing more than a hammered down version in your country and if you don't thwart that, and toss it. And I said conservatives in our country are pussies. They've gone along for this forever. We didn't get in this situation. They were controlled opposition. Remember, since Nixon's time or since Lyndon Johnson, we've controlled the White House more times. We've controlled the legislation more times. How did we get to $36 trillion in debt? How did we get to $2 trillion deficits every year? How did we end up spending trillions of dollars in Afghanistan and Iraq? It just wasn't all progressive Democrats. The quote-unquote Republican Party, the established order, had most to do with this.
Well, Reagan famously gave amnesty to illegal migrants, and I think you could very much criticize him and Nixon as well for not reversing the LBJ.
He's a perfect example that you bring this up. The two things that happened for Reagan, I want to be specific about this, on Middle East wars and immigration. He was sold a whole package that everything that was going to be done and we would never have this problem again in the late 1980s by Ted Kennedy and guys in his own party. There will be absolute border security. The border will be secured. This will never happen again. It was terrible it happened. And if you do this, and it's like 3 million people overall, this will never happen again. They lied to him. What they did is the amnesty first, and they never did the enforcement. This shows you the capitalist and the political class they want to invade everywhere and invite everybody in. For the capitalist, right, the business community in Wall Street, of course they want as much illegal aliens as possible. It drives down wages among unskilled workers. This is why all of our visa programs are all funded. We have no really legitimate immigration in this country. It's all a con to get cheap labor in here to compete against American citizens. President Reagan, and I think he said later he would have never done the deal. The people around him said, hey, you got hoodwinked, and he wasn't happy about it because they were committed. People on the Republican side this was done. They never forced anything. Also, about involvement in Mideast wars, remember, the Tehran or the Persians gave over our hostages, which is a young naval officer, in the workup. I had been in the Persian Gulf, in the North Arabian Sea, in the carrier battle groups, preparing for the Carter invasion. Right, I wasn't there when the invasion took place, but the invasion was a debacle. And as a young naval officer in the training, I could tell you it was not going to turn out well because the plan itself was kind of half-baked. You never saw Reagan press that after those hostages came home. And when he was talked into putting troops into Beirut, they got blown up in the biggest terrorist attack we'd had till 9/11, the Beirut massacre. And he told Capone, get him out of here. I'm focused on the evil empire. I got to stay focused on the evil empire. So it shows you the apparatus, and particularly the Bush faction that was in, the globalist faction that was in and poisoned, particularly the latter years of President Reagan, about how insidious they are and what they will do once they get their control of power.
You talk about the globalists, and I want to mention a few people who might be viewed as globalists to some. Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, even Elon Musk, who's very much in favor of H-1B visas, bringing in.
He's trying to convince me. He's trying to convince me as a populist nationalist. I said,
right. Well, I'm saying to you that perhaps they're not, right? So
first of all, okay, stop.
So why are they surrounded? Why is President Trump surrounded himself with people who are globalists?
If you saw the, and I realize now why he did it inside. Yes, it was cold, but it was beautifully shot. It had TV lighting, and it was like he wanted to recreate the deck of the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Harbor in 1945 with MacArthur and Admiral Nimitz taking the surrender of the Imperial High Command. Those were the oligarchs that essentially come to sign a surrender document. Okay, they had opposed President Trump in the first term, in 16 campaign. In the first term, they fought a separate way. All of these, except for Elon, and I'll get to that in a second, every one of these guys that was on display, it was like a display case, right? It was like Teddy Roosevelt would go big game hunting and have like a water buffalo from the Amazon. He had them right there front and center. He wanted the whole world to see it. He wanted the whole world to see that they're supplicants of Trump who they try to defeat. We'll talk about their influence over time, but that was number one. I beat these guys. They're here kissing my ass. They're coming to Mar-a-Lago with their little $1 million checks and all this stuff. They want to be best friends. For your audience, their Damascene moment was about 11 o'clock on the evening, Eastern Standard Time, on the evening of 5 November when Pennsylvania went. When Pennsylvania went and Trump won the presidency, all these guys were on the road to Damascus. They all realized they really weren't progressive Democrats that were in partnership to suppress the MAGA movement and suppress either debank it, deplatform it, you figure it out. They were actually populist nationalists. They had the revelation, and they couldn't wait to get to Mar-a-Lago. The key thing, and this is how good President Trump is, psychologically, he's playing at a different level than everybody else. When he had Zuckerberg come down, because Zuckerberg's the most afraid because he sees Bannon on the show every day. He's a criminal. We got to try him. Zuckerberg goes down. It's a whole new look. He's broed out. He's cut. He's in a T-shirt. He's got this like wig on his weird hair. It's not the weird nerd you saw before. He's like a weirder UFC nerd. He puts a UFC guy on his board. He's broing out, going to these fights. He's trying to be like a guy, right? It's still Zuckerberg, the nerd, but he's trying to be a guy. He goes down and gives the check. Trump does what Trump does best. He lets the guy go out and says, hey, Trump invited me to the inauguration, and I'm going. Once that hit, there was a floodgate. You saw every corporate CEO and all these tech bros, they said, I better get to Mar-a-Lago and pay homage, right, and try to get to the inauguration. President Trump played it particularly. But these people are all progressive Democrats. They're all globalists. They're all oligarchs, and they're feudalists because they don't really believe in the democratic process, okay? These guys are all the wealthiest guys in the world. They're quite dangerous, and I think it's all got to be broken up by, I'm a neo-Brandeisian when it comes to antitrust here, that I'm not as worried about the consumer prices and that, which is obviously a concern. I'm concerned about concentrations of power, particularly concentration of power where you combine private power with governmental power. I think that's really...
Isn't that Elon Musk? Private power and government power, and that's the concerns that people have raised.
I think in Musk's case, it's quite... Listen, I've been the biggest critic of Elon Musk, but I've also been his biggest supporter. And I know people don't see the support side. Number one, and this is his engineering mind at work, because he is an engineer. In my interactions with him, he doesn't think like other people. He comes at everything in a mathematical and engineering. He came up and backed our play. And folks got to understand, and this is very important in British politics, is that the pressure around Trump is always to moderate. The pressure on Trump is not to be the savage. The pressure on Trump is not to be like we like it, right? Don't give two Fs, let's just roll, because that's what the people want. And it's always this thing, the biggest thing they try to get him to moderate on is to go after the mythic suburban woman. If you just tone it down, there's a whole group of mythic suburban women out there that are going to come your way. And I say that's ridiculous. We have the MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again moms, but they're the cutting edge of a new political movement. That's not the traditional suburban mom. Elon Musk understood that this theory of the case, that you had this MAGA movement and this election would be a MAGA plus. That you had the MAGA base that had President Trump's back, plus you had low information, low propensity voters that were out there in the hinterland, but you got to go dig those out, and they will vote for Trump. And the other plus was that you had a little bit of these tech bros that could come along, right? They don't bring a lot of votes, but it's a lot of media attention. And you had the Make America Healthy Again mothers. Those mothers that have been awakened or red-pilled, mainly Obama voters, that have been red-pilled during the pandemic, and now are at the cutting edge of this kind of, anti-Department of Health, anti-Fauci group that we could get. He backed that play, and how did he back that play? He put $250 million cash money in 5 months. When people talk about the United States and about the amount of billionaires putting in money, always remember, when you talk about the Adelsons putting 100 million, or some people put 100 million, that's normally over a cycle. That's a 4-year cycle. Elon Musk wrote $250 million worth of checks in 5 months to back the ground game, not fancy commercials, but really the ground game. All that professional layer you had to put in on the self-organizing effort, plus the data. And it's what I think, no doubt, was a massive part of the, not just taking the presidency, but also holding the House and taking the Senate, and particularly piercing the blue wall. And Elon, when he went on stage all the time, was also all the time talking about the precinct strategy, talking about canvassing, talking about get out the vote, talking about those nuts and bolt things about how Trump wins. Number two, I've been kind of the father of this concept of deconstruction of the administrative state. I came up in 17 and said, we have to take out this bureaucracy. Later, I saw how the deep state part of it tried to destroy Trump, and I said, this thing's got to go. Doge coming in is kind of what you need. We have an official government part of that, the Office of Management and Budget, but they're kind of limited in their impact of what someone like Elon can bring, plus the engineering expertise, and that's what he's done. What he's done so far, he's doing a line diagram on literally the U.S. government, which surprisingly, it's quite complicated to know how it works. His whole memo from OMB, the OMB memo, was to find out where in this vast system the cash is. And we know there's $5 trillion going out, and now we realize it's in every House district, it's Meals on Wheels, it's Head Start, it's after school programs, it's Medicaid, it's everywhere. His second part, and this is where it got even more controversial, is he said, hey, that's where the money is. I have to be where the checks are written, where it comes from a authorization of Congress to actually Treasury sending the cash into your account. That's what, over the weekend, he's basically got a team in there. Now, Scott Bess, I know very well, saying they have read-only ability. They don't have the ability to really stop checks. They don't have the ability to actually redo checks. But he's adding benefit to the fact of USAID, which is so controversial. It's $50 billion a year, so it's huge in the grand scheme of cutting a deficit. It's not going to solve our problem. But he identified that, and he worked with people to actually shut it down and freeze and make sure nobody could get into the building until they figure it out. So President Trump has this authorization in the Constitution. If the Democrats don't think so, go to court. They've already gone to court, and we'll see how these lawsuits play out. And Elon is an advisor and a consultant. I agree that there's going to be issues about data. There's going to be issues about personal information that has to be hermetically sealed by the department in charge, whether it's Besson at Treasury, whether it's Rush Vote over at OMB. I'm sure those things are being done. President Trump's obviously very concerned about that too. President Trump just came out and said, hey, the guy does what I want him to do, and if he comes to an idea I don't like, I don't do it. So I'm in charge, right? He just said this on the tarmac yesterday. He said it in another, I think, interview last night. He says, I'm in charge. This guy's not co-president. He's an advisor. He's doing good work. And where I don't think it's good, I won't let him do it. So in that case, and remember, I have big issues with Elon Musk.
I was going to ask, just very, very quickly, just to clarify, do you think he is a globalist or not?
Oh, he's definitely a globalist, no doubt. There's no doubt he's a globalist.
So he's trying to persuade you otherwise, you said?
I think that if you see his profile on Twitter, I think he's trying to. And look,
he's retweeting you a lot, I see.
He put a segment up we had with Michael Benz last night, because when somebody's doing something positive, I'm the first to give him credit. Like I said, I gave Elon credit for those first two things, but other people wouldn't. I'm the first one that went out there and said, hey, this guy's added a lot of value. I'm also the one given all my work, the third element, all my work in Europe, and particularly with Brexit, with Nigel Farage. I was the first one to say, hey, Elon, particularly Alternative for Deutschland, and I adamantly oppose what he said about Nigel, because it's not true. I think Nigel's true, but even Nigel and I'm a huge supporter of Tommy Robinson, and I've gotten a lot of grief. We with Raheem Kassam and really at Breitbart, We drove that story for years. It was Breitbart, and Nigel's very upfront. That's not for me. I don't think that's a way for us to basically take over the Tory party. He has a different view of it. He's clearly the leader. We're just media guys. I've committed to go to Tommy when he gets out. I've always been close to Tommy. Raheem's put on tributes and rallies for Tommy. Tommy's got some rough edges, right? No doubt about it. But the fight that he had at its core was to tell a truth that we had to face, particularly about certain elements of radical Islam and certain elements about Islamic society that just can't be tamped down. He did it. Now, what I didn't like is Elon, to get away from the conversation he was losing here on HB1 visas and people saying, hey, I thought you were a nationalist, now I see you're a globalist. He went there and tried to blow up Nigel. But my guidance to Europe is the following. This guy has the two tactical nuclear weapons of modern politics. He has unlimited money. And when I say unlimited money, he is a guy that could write a $250 million check in 5 months and it doesn't affect his lifestyle. Okay? I don't know of anybody else in the world that could do that. Number two, he has a powerful social media platform, and he can bind what he binds and he can loose what he looses. He can put you up and make you a rock star, or he can bury you in the basement, because he's not a free speech absolutist at all. He can bury you in the basement, never to be seen again. There's not a centrist or center-left government in all the continent that could withstand the onslaught of an Elon Musk that backed a populist party. And I think you're going to see, we're going to have a first test with Alternative for Deutschland. I think you're going to see it, but people in the United Kingdom and people in the continent ought to know that I believe this guy's going to be in your life and you're going to have to deal with it. Now here, we're having a big fight with him about this. It's not just about H-1B visas. It's about the central beating heart of the economic model of the apartheid state of Silicon Valley, which is American labor is too expensive, right? American labor is not compliant. They got an attitude because they're Americans, right? And they're citizens. So we want labor, particularly in algorithmic companies, which most of these are, labor's the whole cost. So we want labor that costs 50% less. And we want labor that's totally compliant to these outrageous demands we make of the length of time they work and what they have to do. And the way they do that is by importing not more skilled labor. That's the lie. It's not even as skilled. Lower skilled tech workers that come in and undercut the American labor, and they do this across the board. This is not about bringing this is not bringing Einsteins in. We have a program to bring Einsteins in. We brought in 1,200 German rocket scientists post-war up into the Mercury program, of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of engineers that were working on those programs, and we brought 1,200. There's room in the United States to bring in the best if you have to bring, although I disagree with that. I think that makes us an imperial power. I want the best to go back to their homes and make their own countries get great again, and we will work with them on that. But even in the regard that you have to have the Einsteins, there's ways to do it and cut out all these scams on the visa situation.
I'm sure Elon would support the rocket scientists. I want to ask one more question about the US, or a couple more questions about the US, then we'll move on to Britain. So Vivek tweeted over Christmas, Vivek Ramaswamy, for far too long, at least since the 1990s and probably longer, our American culture has valued mediocrity over excellence. The best engineers will not be produced by a culture that favors the jock over the valedictorian, or the prom queen over the math Olympiad champion. What's happened to Vivek? Was he right about American culture?
He went into the witness protection program after that. I don't believe he tweeted for 30 days after that. It went radio silent. Look, it's incredibly offensive. We pride ourselves to be the country of the right stuff. That kind of undefinable grit, determination, courage that gets things done. We're not a mediocre culture or society. We've gone through some speed bumps because of the woke nature of what happened, and kind of these globalists trying to suppress really the backbone of the country, of every ethnicity and race we've got, this kind of grit and determination of the American working man and woman. I think Vivek exposed himself for a lot of what he really believes. It was not well received among MAGA.